A Heroine's Beginning, Chapter 13. The room shone with the light of 1,000 stars. Majestic chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, spilling light upon the ground. The floors, tabletops, and every other available surface had been polished to perfection, which only served to intensify the glow of the hundreds of candles that illuminated the ballroom. I had never before been inside a palace, let alone a ballroom. I had always imagined that if I were ever lucky enough to see the inside of a palace, I would be delivering groceries or making up the fireplaces, not elegantly strutting around the ballroom like some high-born lady. I lifted my head high and straightened my back, just like Jack had taught me to. A small voice in the back of my head reminded me that I had always wanted to be a part of a fairy tale like this, to act high-born, while a handsome man, probably a prince, danced among us. I had never actually set eyes on the Duke's son before. I hoped he wasn't similar to his father, who I had seen. The Duke was a very stern man, who appeared to have a permanent frown on his face, or at least he had the few times I had seen him, riding through the village, surveying his lands. I had absolutely no intentions of meeting the lordling, or seducing him, like every other girl here. Romance was something that would have to wait, and I knew the chances of him even glancing at me were very slim anyway. I had decided when I accepted the invitation, I was not going to delude myself into a fantasy. I was going to enjoy myself on a night I was sure never to forget, in a gorgeous gown, and my new fake airs and graces. This was my chance to be like Maid Marion, bold and brave, and just a little flirtatious. The room was filled to the brim with young girls just like me, and most of them in much more fashionable dresses. I was not jealous of them, though. Fashionable seemed to have far too many frills for my taste. There were some dresses that looked like they were going to drag the wearer down, with the sheer weight of the jewels sewn into them. I glanced down at my own dress. It was very plain by comparison, but the emerald silk shone brightly in the candlelight, and I infinitely preferred it to some of the more gaudy dresses. Very few ladies were wearing green, and I had always preferred to wear more earthy colors. This shade reminded me of the forest, when the sun is shining through the leaves at sundown, making them appear darker than they are. I returned my eyes to some ladies nearby. There was one lady who was wearing a dress of a bright shade of pink, just dripping with jewels. The parts that were not covered in jewels were hidden in yards and yards of lace and frills that were sewn on quite poorly. It was almost as if the person who had made the gown had no interest in it, and was told by the buyer to just cover it with as much fabric as they could, never mind the pattern or the stitching. However, the wearer did look familiar. Her light blonde hair, pulled tightly into an elaborate knot, was also dripping with jewels. The knot was so tight, I was sure that if someone felt the top of her head, they would only feel her skull, and her pale hair did nothing to hide that illusion. She inclined her head slightly, gazing at the door with intent eyes, almost as if she could see through it to where the Duke's son was surely getting ready right now. I caught a glimpse of her profile, and to my horror discovered that it was Lady Idiot, or more accurately Lady Anna. Well, at least that explains the dress, I thought to myself. I swiftly turned away and began to walk in the other direction, eager to get some distance between myself and Lady Anna. I began to search the room to see if Ella had been allowed to join her family, or was able to sneak out. My mind kept turning to how well she had danced in the manor, when she was happy and carefree. She had so many troubles since the day her mother died. It would be a shame for her to miss out on such a wonderful night. My attention was seized by a manservant hitting the floor with a staff. The Duke stood at the front of the room, just before the orchestra, his bright red satin coat standing out amongst the sea of pastel colors. His stern face was just as harsh as I remember, his graying hair combed back neatly. Everyone was facing him, a few maidens craning their necks to see past the door behind him. His loud, booming voice echoed across the ballroom. "My lords and ladies," he said, "and other guests," he added in a quieter tone. "Thank you for attending this special event, in honor of my son's return home and coming of age. I hope you enjoy the night's revels." As he said this, the large oak doors that we had all entered through were shut with a loud boom. "So without further ado, I present my son, Lord Christopher. The ball shall commence." The doors behind him opened, and a handsome young man stepped out. He was tall, and stood out in his crisp, clean white suit, with golden decorations covering the front of his doublet. His face was not at all stern like his father's, but had a polite smile gracing it. It was obvious it wasn't a genuine smile, but at least it looked like he was trying. His eyes flitted over the crowd of people, as if he were searching for someone. Lord Christopher began to make his way to the dance floor, looking at the maidens before him, some who were desperately pushing their way in front of the crowd. He seemed hesitant to choose a maiden to dance the first dance with. The minutes passed, and he still seemed unable to choose. Just then, all of our attention was taken by a loud knock on the main doors that reverberated around the ballroom. Everyone's head was turned, as the footman by the door went to pull it open. There, standing on the other side of the door, was Ella. She was wearing a beautiful golden dress that complemented the color of her hair perfectly. It was loose down her back in flowing curls, and a sparkling gold tiara balanced on top of them. Her dress was almost glowing, though I just presumed it was to do with the candles. She gracefully descended the steps, and I noticed her heels making a sound on the ballroom floor. I could just about see them when she lifted her skirt to walk, and they were as shimmering as gold. All the time I had been in the manor, I had never seen Lady Eleanor wear a dress like this, and Lady Ella had said she would be wearing one of her mother's old dresses, so I began to wonder where she had gotten this dress. Her face was radiant, all traces of exhaustion and hardship wiped from her brow. Her smile was truly dazzling, and her eyes lit up when she met Lord Christopher's gaze. Her smile widened more, if that were even possible. She began to make her way toward him, and he began to make his way toward her. His smile no longer polite and distant, but one of genuine joy. The crowd parted and let them go to each other. They met in the middle of the ballroom, right underneath the main shining chandelier, spilling light onto the pair of them. They started talking in quiet voices, so no one else could hear. There was a familiarity about them, like they had met before. I was confused by this. Surely Ella would have told me if she had met the Duke's son before. Then it hit me. The man in the woods, the one who helped Ella with a cart when it broke. This must be him. Lord Christopher held out his hand to Ella, and she took it, beaming at him. The orchestra started up with a waltz. Ella and Lord Christopher took their positions and started to sway in time. I was fixed to the spot, entranced like everyone else in the room. They moved together beautifully, swirling and spinning gracefully. They seemed completely lost in each other, never taking their eyes away from the other's face. They were so lost in the dance and the music that they didn't notice they almost danced into someone in the crowd on the edges of the dance floor. They moved back quickly, but Ella's dress still gently hit them. It didn't even slow them down. I knew Ella was completely wrapped up in her partner then. If she had been thinking straight, she would have stopped and apologized immediately. They continued waltzing, and as the music reached its peak, Lord Christopher placed his hands gently on her waist and lifted her up into the air, spinning her as he did so. Her eyes were wide in amazement, and she looked as though she was floating through the air. When he placed her back down, she spun around, and he quickly lifted her hand to his lips and gave her a swift kiss. Her face flushed, and when the music came to its final chords, she sank into a low curtsy, as Lord Christopher gave her an equally low bow. The crowd applauded the dancers, and the spell that seemed to be cast over them was broken momentarily. The conductor turned around and announced the next dance was going to be a polka. I had learned a little of this dance, but did not feel confident enough to try dancing to it. And besides, no one had asked me to dance. I saw Lord Christopher ask Ella for another dance, and knew this was going to make Lady Anna furious, as she had already picked out the lordling as her future husband. I wondered why she hadn't already jumped out and tried to drag Ella back home for stealing her man. I looked around for Lady Anna, so as best to avoid her, or keep her as far away from Ella as physically possible. I found my way to the banquet table. It was overflowing with baked bite-sized goods, fruits, jellies, sandwiches, and meat. I knew this would be enough food to feed my entire village for a month. I began piling my plate high with food. It all looked so tempting. The food was delicious, and I had to stop myself from eating too much. I watched Ella and Lord Christopher from a distance, content that Ella had finally found some happiness. There was an empty chair on the far side of the ballroom, and I hastily made my way toward it before someone else took it. I sat down and began eating. When my plate was empty, the polka finished, and I looked up expecting to see Ella. But I found they had disappeared. There were people milling around all over the room, trying to find partners for the next dance, which had just been announced as a polonaise, my former arch-nemesis. I smiled a little, as it brought Jack to the front of my mind. He had finally got me to master the step-kick-step that was required for this dance. "Now what would a lovely lady such as yourself be doing sitting all alone?" a voice asked me. My head snapped around, and I found myself face to face with a dark-haired young man, who was smiling down at me. It was the kind of smile that showed he was a little arrogant and used to getting his own way. I squared my shoulders and politely answered him. "I was enjoying the food. It's rather good," I told him. "Well, you appear to have finished," he said, his eyes glancing at my empty plate. "So would you care to join me for this dance?" He offered his hand before me. I had never been asked to dance before in my life, excluding Jack, but I thought that was a little different. "Yes, I would. Thank you," I said, and grasped his hand. He pulled me up out of the chair, and we made our way toward the center of the room. I tried to relax and put on my brave face, but inside my brain was whirling like mad. "Don't screw this up," I kept telling myself. "Head up, shoulders straight, smile on." The music began to play. The same polonaise rhythm graced my ears as the one I had practiced all morning. The man in front of me bowed, and I curtsied, and I took his hand, facing him. We began to dance, and I surprised myself by being able to keep up with everyone else doing the basic step. It was only when the music began to build and the dancers started to make different patterns on the floor did I start to panic again. This I had not learned this morning. But the man next to me whispered in my ear, "Just follow my lead. Wherever I step, you step beside me." I tried to look down at where he was stepping without making my head drop, which I discovered was surprisingly difficult. I didn't fall over, and I didn't bump into anyone else, so I counted it as a success. "Now, my lovely lady, you must tell me your name. I can't spend all night calling you my lady," said the man, once I had begun to get the hang of the new steps. "Marion," I told him. "Now I think you owe it to me to tell me your name." "James, my Lady Marion. And how exactly did you end up here tonight?" "I was invited," I said. Now that he had called me a lady several times, I didn't want to ruin it by telling him I was a low-born girl who simply got here by chance and Ella's goodwill. "Why are you here?" "I'm here to support an old school friend of mine. He's had a terrible time of it lately, and I thought I would come along and cheer him up. After all, every party needs someone to liven it up a bit." "So you're here to ensure he has a good time?" I asked. "Trust me, he's already doing fine. At the moment, he doesn't need my help," James replied. We continued dancing for a while, not really speaking. The polonaise came to an end, and I smiled in triumph. I had not thoroughly embarrassed myself. I gave James a low curtsy and turned away, but someone caught my wrist. I was spun back around, facing James again. "Where are you running off to?" he asked me, still smiling arrogantly. "The dance has ended, and I find myself in need of a drink," I told him. "Well, then at least let me get that drink for you," he told me, and before I could respond, he had vanished into the crowd. I followed in the direction he had gone, and kept getting pushed one way or another by people also trying to get past me. When I eventually made it to the table where drinks were being served, James was not there. There was a tap on my shoulder, and I turned around to see James standing there, still with a smug smile on his face, holding 2 glasses of wine. He extended one of his hands to me, and I took it graciously. I sipped it slowly, reveling in the taste. I had never had proper wine before, and it was sweet and filling. "So this friend?" I asked him. "You said you went to school together. Does that mean your other schoolmates are here as well?" "Yes, as a matter of fact they are," he replied. "Are they all as smug as you?" I inquired. He laughed loudly at this. "You know, not many people would have the courage to call me smug." "Well, I'm not most people. And what are you going to do about it?" "I don't know. This situation has never arisen before, so I must simply bear through the pain." "Oh, how hard for you." "It is, my lady. You have delivered me a mortal wound to my pride." "A mortal wound? I?" "Yes, and it can only be cured with another dance. So if you would do me the honor." We were both laughing now, and I couldn't believe I was that bold in front of a man I had just met. I blamed the wine. We walked back toward the dance floor. A minuet started playing, and I felt confident I knew how to dance to this one properly, so I felt I could talk to James while dancing. "Is this working to cure your pride?" I asked him. "I think it is, but we must keep dancing to make completely sure." "All right, if it means saving your pride." "Well, you were the one who wounded it in the first place. I believe you owe it to me." "Could I not find another way to repay the debt?" I teased. I did not really want to stop dancing with him, but I couldn't resist. "No, there's no other way in this world," he said, spinning me around. I giggled a little. "So, Marion, I know very little about you, apart that you think I'm smug," James said. "Tell me a little about yourself." "What would you like to know?" I asked. "Where do you live?" "Well, I'm not telling you that." "Why not?" "Because I'm not telling a stranger where I live." "Fair, fair. All right. Tell me something else. Tell me a secret," he said with a smile. "I don't trust you with where I live. Why would I trust you with a secret?" "Because if I don't know where you live, there's very little chance I'll ever see you after tonight. Then there's no reason not to trust me with a secret." "I think your logic is flawed." "It would help heal my pride quicker." We were momentarily separated by the dance, and I moved on to a new partner. This man was taller than James, but used his height to make it appear like he was looking down on me. His piercing blue eyes did not look kind at all. His coat was very fine and looked very expensive. He did not speak to me for the short time we danced together. I guessed he wasn't very sociable. I was rather glad when the dance returned us back to our original partners. When I stood next to James again, I couldn't help but smile. "So, have you decided which secret to tell me?" James asked. I decided to tease him a little more, as he was clearly delighting in teasing me. "No, a lady never tells. Ever," I told him. "We shall see about that. After all, the night is still young," James said, with a challenging glint in his eye. "We shall see, my lady.